Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome at this special webinar dedicated to the theme of sustainable feeding solutions. And sustainability is a theme that is being used by organizations and companies all over the world. Yet, what I find intriguing about it is what exactly do we mean with it? Well, today I'm going to have two speakers in the studio who will explain a little bit more and explain their views about this topic. And I'm pretty sure that is going to lead to a lot of different insights. This webinar is hosted by Pig Progress, so we shall have an emphasis on pig nutrition here. I am in Rotterdam in the Netherlands. Here it is 11 a.m. in the morning, and I shall be your host for the next hour or so. In that hour, we'll have two speakers. I'm happy to introduce Dr. Amir Khan from Danisco Animal Nutrition, part of IFF, as well as Brecht Bruneel. He's with me in the studio and he's Innovation Manager at Orffa. Both speakers will introduce their view on sustainability within pig feeding solutions, and after their presentations there will be plenty of time for a Q&A session. And one of the questions that I am personally interested in is to hear which countries have an exemplary approach towards sustainability in animal feeding. But obviously, I will not be the only one to ask questions. We need you at home or in the office for that as well. In case you have a question for either of the speakers, just hover with your mouse over the screen. You'll discover this orange button, and with that, you can ask a question for either of the gentlemen. So please do so, because that would give us a nice and interactive input. In case we don't get around to answering these questions, you will receive an answer by email. You'll notice that we also have a question for you. During the webinar, there will be a poll question included. So just take your time to fill out the answer that you think is best, and we'll come back later on in the webinar to discuss the answers. Right, without further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker of this webinar, and that is Dr. Amir Khan. He's connected to us via a video connection. He's based in Singapore, and he's technical sales leader for animal nutrition. For Asia Pacific. Welcome, Dr. Khan. Your presentation will revolve around nutribiosis and its impacts on gastrointestinal health in animal performance. Well, take it away. Welcome in the webinar, and we're curious to hear your story.
Thank you, Vincent. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks to your team to make this possible. And let me say, hello to our audience. So in recent years, we hear these, terms, often, we talk about sustainability, environmental stewardship, efficiency improvement, and, alike. So these are very important subjects, and they, demand our attention. For this event, with the help of my colleagues, I picked a topic that has a direct and indirect, in some cases, significant, connection with, this, subject, and potentially we can address some of them at, varying degrees. So, if you don't mind to, start, with the slides. So, nutribiosis is our working model as a holistic approach built on a combination of various scientific and complementary disciplines, including physiology, microbiology, immunology, and nutrition. And then there are cyclic interaction, a complex interaction of all these, which can be utilized to work on the microbiota inside the host. It is important to understand the functions of each of these, and then, as I said, that there's no cyclic interaction of these pillars to provide a holistic solution that it's focused on the microbiome. And I should mention here, microbiome should be considered as one of the systems that it's inside a host and an animal. So to come up with the right programs, they need to be custom made. They need to be specific, flexible, and the key word here is evolving. It takes time to really, put everything together and make sure, it works for that specific case and for that customer based on their needs. The situation, circumstances the customer is dealing with, the region, such as, the climatic effects, even, the genetic, down to the, flock. And putting these combinations, what we have in the the portfolio, to bring a practical solution for that customer for that specific case. Next slide, please. So, as I said, these programs, they need to be tailor-made. It needs to be specific for that the targets that we have in sight. So we need to engage the customer with consultative approach, really to understand what's going on, and understand the important versus urgent. I know it's cliche, but I believe in it that we really need to separate them and make sure we firefighting, or we are really getting into the foundation. So in order to do that, I have a short list here. It's not including all of them, but some of the important points here is looking at the the species, the genetic line, diet specification, and feeding a strategy. Actually, these are really related to that part of sustainability that we can talk about it a little bit more as we go. What are the objectives, the KPIs that customer is considering for that specific case? And then the environment. So when I'm talking about the environment, I'm talking about all levels, from the climate, from the macro and micro. In order to do that, we have some tools that we can put together in our portfolio, such as enzymes, the primary ones, and then the complementary, probiotics, phytogenics, Methane combined solutions. One of my favorites, the Synchro concept, that we can put some of these things together, such as the Synchro Y, which is a combination of probiotics, multi-strain probiotics, and enzyme, and then put all these things in a specific program that it's related to the proper combinations and the right dosing. Next slide, please. So Synchro combines the two technologies, and the target here is to improve the digestion and consequently the performance of the animal. So one part is the enzymes. We have National Animal Nutrition, part of IFF, and then is the probiotics. So in this case, we have a multi-strain and three bacillus, and with the combination with the protease. So, and the target is to maximize the nutrient digestibility, the support of beneficial bacteria to work on the microbiome for the proper population in the host, and improve the intestinal integrity, and an important part of this whole thing, to make sure the animal is ready for the kind of combating disorders, diseases, and be ready for maximizing the utilization. Next slide, please. So here, what we have with this Synchro under the nutribiosis and model is starting from nutrition, being the the biggest part of cost in any operation, to improve the digestibility. Mainly, this product is focused for the release of fiber-bound nutrients, increased protein digestion and release of amino acids. And so in one part, what we can do is by, better utilization, going back to our, the diet formulation and the feeding strategy that, we can, feed them right, not to waste the, resources. And the other part of this is that by better digestibility, we reduce the undigested fraction, which can reach to the a lower GIT and actually cause some problems in terms of shift towards non-beneficial or opportunistic or pathogenic bacteria. The other part is the microbiome, a complex issue, but it's so what is really important that is to manage it properly. Definitely, we don't want to eradicate everything. The target there is to have the proper microbiome inside the host, with the right proportion of the markers such as lactobacillus or bifidobacteria, and keeping the non-beneficial or opportunistic and pathogenic in check. So then it's the gastrointestinal tract and immune function together. So the first line of defense for animals is, the epithelial cells and, the surface. So it is really important to make sure the integrity is there, that tight junctions are, fully developed. It is, the animal is not, kind of, facing some kind of, immune responses. They can be very expensive in terms of net energy available to the animal. In general, under the dynamic energy budget, so there is, a limited net energy available to the animal for all the metabolic, activities, and anything that is taken away from that, actually is, impacting the growth, but at the same time, can shift the whole system and metabolism of the animal in case there is a severe response. I believe we have the next slide. We have a poll. So next slide, please.
Indeed, we have a poll. So, audience, we would like to know something from you. What is your main focus regarding sustainable pig production? Is that A, livability, B, feed costs, C, disease challenges, or D, the use of alternative ingredients? So A, livability, B, feed costs, C, disease challenges, or D, the use of alternative ingredients. Dr. Amir will now continue with his presentation, and in a few slides we will come back with the answers of our audience. Over to you again.
Thank you. Okay, so can we go to the slide, please? Okay, so going back to Think First Buy, how the product put together and developed. So here is the selection of the 3 strains. So here is just the example. Actually, the library was and still is much bigger than this, but it's just to give you an example how this was done. So as you see on the right side, we looked at 6 enzymes, xylanase, and looking at beta manganase, and then up to amylase. So the 6 enzymes are there. So looking at the strains available and put them together to see which combination of the 3 gives us the maximum amount of these 6 enzymes that can be utilized by the animal when they're so available as an exogenous source. So the main thing here is to attack the fiber bound molecules and release the nutrients that can be utilized by the animal. Next slide, please. Okay. So in feed protease, it mimics the hydrolysis, and it's a complementary enzyme with the endogenous enzymes, and so just to go over that and explain that a little bit more. So pepsin has a a wide substrate specificity, and but it's mainly active in a more acidic condition. So GIT, gastrointestinal tract, the upper part is more acidic, and when it comes to the intestine, the midsection and the lower section, there is a shift in pH, and moves towards the more alkaline. We will talk about this a little bit more later. But what is if you look at the top portion, we have 20 amino acids there, and showing, for example, pepsin is active on the hydrolysis on the amino acid bonds, and then looking at the trypsin, chymotrypsin, and elastase, that they actually active in a different pH, but the spectrum is not as broad. So bringing something like a synchronous Y, the protease in that, it has a complementary effect that can work with these endogenous enzymes and expand the activity and the site for the cleavage. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so let's start with the left side. So as you see, the acid environment pH of 3.7. So this is close to what we have in the upper gastrointestinal tract. So there are three sections here. So as you see on the bottom, so we have pepsin and pepsin with added protease there. So there are three segments there. Here separated based on the size, but aside from the size, the structure is very important. But so just for the make it simple, here we go with the lower part, the not easily digestible, and then the midsection is the easily digestible, and then on top is the readily digestible. So what we want more of smaller ones that they require less energy in form of ATP inside the cells to utilize them. So as you see in the lower pH, the addition of the protease is not making a significant change. But when we move to the now right side and we get to the more alkaline environment, pH of around 6.5, which is close to what we see in the midsection, beginning of the intestine, the duodenum, jejunum, and then going to ileum. So with that shift, that we can see addition of protease has a significant impact. So let's go section by section here. This part is important. So looking at the section, the bottom section, the not easily digestible, that require more energy to break them down, and potentially there is a fraction that cannot be used by the animal and can get to the lower GIT. There's a significant change there. So it drops by 15%. This is really important, and has a major impact on that NE. But at the same time, what we see on the top is a good increase in the readily digestible. So this has a major shift that can impact the performance of the animal, and potentially translate to better growth for the animal at different stages. Can we go to the next slide?
I'll take it over for a bit because we have the poll result, and I have the result for you on my screen here. The livability answer didn't get a lot of percentage. Only 10% of the answer of the audience went for that. The winner here is feed costs with 34%, and the others, disease challenges and the use of alternative ingredients, both got just below 30%. Is that something that you had expected, or does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't. Actually, feed cost is I expect it to be one of the top choices. I believe one of the main things is a major part of the cost. So whatever you do there, you can see the impact really quickly. So what is interesting is that the other two they have, as you said, I think they are very close to each other. But to me is like that combination. So we really need to consider all of them together. But no, not very surprising.
Very good. Well, I'll go to the next slide and please take it over from me again.
Sure. Thank you. Okay. So let's look at the, some some of the results, and what we can see here. The main focus is on the synergistic effect of putting the probiotics and enzyme together. So looking at the a control and then bring the protease alone, we don't see much. And then we put the probiotic again. There's not much positive change, but when they are together, we can see the synergistic effect, an addition of over 100 kilocalorie of energy. And this is from that portion that can be utilized by the animal. At the same time, we can consider this at the time that we are putting the diets together as a down spec, and kind of save on the feed cost, reduce the nutrients needed, which I believe it goes to the heart of a part of the sustainability in terms of feeding animals. So on the right, so we are looking at the nitrogen digestibility. So we can translate this in a very simple way as let's say that like a let's say protein breakdown, protein needs, and as you see again that synergistic effect is there. So the protease gives a little bit, probiotic alone has some effect, but when they are put together, that we can see we have a additive synergistic effect and can be utilized by the animal. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's go to immunology a little bit. So this one is related to so PER, transepithelial and electrical resistance is a measure for the gut integrity. So looking from so what we have here is the control, and then so this is in the media is a buffer solution. Then the addition of the digester, as we see that it has a significant impact on the that the TEER. And then looking at the addition of the protease, again not much change there. But when we have the bacillus there, we can see they have a really good impact, a really good positive impact there. And then the both of them together, you can see again a little more additional additive positive effect on this, which is really important to make sure. So you see the point here is just feeding itself, you can count it as a stress. We know that every diet change, specifically if it's a sudden diet change, it can be stressful to the animals. And so here we are not even talking about the pathogens or any issues like that. It's just a normal process that happens with feeding. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have a combination of 3 trials. So the diet composition, it was the corn and soybean around 1/3, and the rest of it just the different ingredients used in this for the diets in these treatment trials. So the 23 to 55 kilos. And so what was used synchronous Y, 5,000 units of protease per kg of feed, 150,000 CFU of the bacillus. Would you please go to the next one? Okay, let's go to some results here. So lactobacillus is, one of the markers as considered as a positive shift for, the microbiota. So you want to have more of the lactobacillus. So as looking at the the count that for 23 to 55 kg. So again going to control protease alone, not much effect. But when we get to the bacillus and then the combination, we see there is a significant positive change in the increasing the lactobacillus, which is one of the things we want to do for managing the microbiota in animals. So FCR, I believe this is one of the, and with the answer we got in our poll, it's really important, and obviously, personally, I like to look at the FCR with a couple of other things at the same time to make a better judgment of what's happening. But this is one of the good indications of the performance. So as we see from the control, protease has some effect with reducing that the right direction by reducing that. So bacillus has again more of the effect, and then when they are together, we can see a significant decrease in the FCR. And if we put it in terms of like from 2.24 to point 0.06, so 8, sorry. So that's a very significant number, and specifically if you're producing feed, it can have a major impact on the utilization of the resources to produce it. Final body weight. So again, we can see protease and bacillus, both of them have show positive effect compared to control. But again, when they are together, we see even better results. That again, so it just keeps confirming that together they have a that synchro concept brings a synergistic effect and better results. Next slide, please. Okay, so livability. So this one is the peak from 28 kilos to 115. They're going heavier weight. So we can see on the livability that there's a positive control, and then synchronous Y on top that there is a positive change. And then in another one is the negative control that putting the synchronous Y on top. And again, we can see, positive, trend in terms of livability. And again, this is really important because, if the mortality happens at specific times, for animals, and then when they go to the, closer to the end, the mortality can become really expensive. So as an example, if they are, at the beginning, the mortality does not have the same weight in terms of value compared to when it's done at the later stage. Next slide, please. Okay, so here is another real case. So looking at using the synchronous Y at 100 grams per ton in this case, and so you see the positive impact there. So 2.8% improvement in pigs reaching full value, and this is not only livability, is related to the the growth potential and getting to with a good FCR. So it's a combined calculation. So for 1,000 peaks here, there's close to 27 peaks, and this is very significant in terms of profitability. Next slide, please. Okay, so Central UI, it is, one of the tools that we can use to, it is proven that has a positive impact on the, with the, utilizing the matrix properly. We can, adjust what we are doing as, the feeding related to the diet specs and the strategies to, we can lower the specification in terms of the protein, energy, and actually that's really, I believe one of the important parts when it comes to sustainability and utilization of the resource. So consistency of the performance, with the with ingredients. This is something we track, and looking at ingredients used in the diet, that we see the fluctuation. There's the variation sometimes, really large in terms of protein, energy, amino acid profile, and using the proper additives actually is one of the practical ways that we can adjust for some of that, and help the whole operation and the animal at the same time. So GIT health, preventative measures, it's really, has various levels that, not only it can, improve the health, it's again related to that, let's say, farm to fork, programs, but at the same time, we can ensure the animals are not challenged, and we can kind of look at the a proper way, for example, dealing with like antibiotic reduce or antibiotic free programs, and sustaining the profitability of the operation. I think that's the bottom line. So it's we need to come up with the solutions that operations can be profitable and properly managed, as one of the important parts of the animal industry. That was my last slide. Thank you very much. And if there are any questions, I believe we have some time to go over them. So thanks again.
Yes, indeed, Dr. Amir, thank you very much. We shall have a Q&A session after the second speaker, so we definitely need your input. So if there are any questions, this is your chance. Please let them know to us, and we shall answer them after the next speaker, who is standing next to me. Dr. Amir, thank you. I'm going to the right of me for you on the left, Brecht Bruneel. He is Innovation Manager for Orffa. And his presentation is titled Environmental Footprint of a Nutritional Emulsifier Applied in Diets for Fattening Pigs. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Vincent, for that kind introduction. So indeed, what I would like to discuss in my talk today, and good morning and good afternoon to all of you that are viewing. So in my presentation, I would like to look at some recent sustainability data obtained for poultry and swine, and this for a specialized feed additive called a nutritional emulsifier. So as we all know, today we live in a globalized world, and a big part of the global population is very much interested in the environment and also making life more sustainable. And this interest actually brings forward a positive response towards quantifying and mitigating footprints of a variety of products. But this also brings forward a negative response towards intensive livestock farming, as it is seen as a big emitter. So the main sources of emission are mentioned here: feed production and manure management. Of course, it is in our interest, because we are in the business of intensive livestock farming, that we figure out how to make the sector more sustainable, because in the end, this intensive livestock farming is here to stay, because we see that a growing global population needs more animal products to feed themselves. If I focus specifically on feed production, then I would like to mention that feed additives play a very important role in feed production. These compounds can complement raw materials that lack amino acids, vitamins, trace minerals, etc. But they're also very interesting because they increase productivity and efficacy, and at the same time they can reduce emissions. So feed additives can form a very valid strategy to improve the sustainability of feeds. And if we look to the industry and the academic world, we see that there is much focus on nowadays on feed additives to improve the sustainability of feeds. I've mentioned some 4 points. So first of all, of course, the curbing of nitrogen excretion by using low protein concentrations is very much of interest. A second point is improving digestibility. Very interesting if we can increase the digestibility of raw materials that we are already using. For example, by using enzymes, we are on a good way to make feeds more sustainable. A very hot topic at the moment is also methane. I see a lot of research, academic and also in the industry, trying to find rumen modulators to reduce methane emission. And then as a last point, very important, is feed efficacy, of course. Additives that improve the feed conversion ratio, so we need less feed to produce meat, or the same amount of meat, are very much interesting. If we look to the international community, we can see that on an international level there are certain initiatives that are going on. And the first initiative that I would like to mention is the Specialty Feed Ingredient Sustainability Project, in short SFES. And this project actually is coming forward from the International Feed Industry Federation, IFIF, and together with FIFANA, which is the European Association, and also together with the American, Brazilian, and Japanese Feed Association. And what they have been doing as a first focus point is to see what is the environmental impact of lowering the crude protein and using amino acids, as you can see, and phytase on the graph. And the first results show very nicely that indeed in pigs and broilers this is a valid strategy. A second initiative can be seen as the Global Feed LCA Institute, GFLI, which actually focuses more on mapping the environmental impact of ingredients and raw materials. So we have both focus on feed additives and raw materials. It is actually based in this context, the interest in making feeds more sustainable, looking at feed additives, and also the international initiatives, that we as Orffa, we looked into the nutritional emulsifier as a valid strategy to actually produce more sustainable feeds. So nutritional emulsifiers are used in the market, in poultry, in swine, also in aquacultural feeds to a high extent. And they are very interesting because they can improve the digestibility of feeds. In the graph here, you can see a meta-analysis of 5 metabolic studies, and it clearly shows that the nutritional emulsifier is able to improve the energy digestibility to a very high extent. Of course, also the crude fat digestibility, because a nutritional emulsifier will emulsify the fat in the gastrointestinal tract to a higher extent. But we also see in our trials that the crude protein digestion is also increased. So this is also a very important point. So in general, improvement of digestibility. If we take a closer look to one metabolic study, we can see that the energy saving or the improvement in energy digestibility is based on the total fat in the diet. So we can see in the graph that if we have a higher amount of total fat, that we have a higher increase in energy digestibility. Also interesting is that if we do not add any fat, we still have fat of the raw materials, and the digestibility of these will also be increased by using a nutritional emulsifier. And it is actually based on these metabolic studies that we have calculated some matrix values that can then be used by feed formulators in their feed formulation programs, of course, where he or she can reformulate the diet and save feed costs. So what is normally happening when we introduce the matrix value and the nutritional emulsifier in the feed is that an amount of oil is lowered in the feed, and this will be, of course, present a feed cost saving. Nowadays, what we see with raw material prices that are increasing, we see much more benefit of using the nutritional emulsifier. These results are very interesting. They show a feed cost saving, they show increase in digestibility. But what is now the sustainability aspect? And to actually map the sustainability effect of this nutritional emulsifier, we as Orffa, we work together with Blonk Consultants, which is a Dutch agri-food sustainability consulting firm. And they actually performed a life cycle assessment based on a validation study that we performed in Brazil in 2016. So in this validation study, we energy reduced the diets, we pushed out some soybean oil, and this provided a feed cost saving. But as we will see in the life cycle analysis or assessment, it will also provide a sustainability aspect. So within this life cycle assessment, it is very important to mention the method, of course. It is based on the international ISO standards. But Blonk Consultants followed also the product environmental footprint method guidelines, which are actually produced by the European Commission. The most important steps in a life cycle assessment, I would like to guide you through them, as they are very important, of course, to understand the concept of life cycle assessment and the sustainability data that was achieved. So first step is the goal and scope definition. The goal, of course, here is to assess the environmental impact of broilers fed with and without the nutritional emulsifier. The environmental aspect or the environmental impact is here denoted as a number of kilograms CO2 equivalents per kilogram of live feed. Then we move on to the scope. Scope is very important because this assesses the boundaries in which we want to assess the impact. And as you can see here on the figure, we use a scope which goes from cradle to farm gate. So everything from crop cultivation, the processing of the crops into feed, the transportation of the feed production, and then also the broiler production is taken into account in this life cycle assessment. The second step and the third step is the inventory analysis and also the impact assessment. So within the inventory analysis, we gather the data, all the inputs, all the outputs of the different steps within the scope are taken into account. We take some data from literature, also from the producing companies, from the transporting companies, and we bundle them into one model. And then in the third step, in the impact assessment, we are going to translate all this data into, for example, one value, the carbon footprint or the global warming potential, which is then expressed as a kilogram of CO2 equivalent per kilogram of live meat. Looking at the results, we can see that the control feed and the broilers that are fed with the control feed, for 1 kilogram of live weight, we need around 4.2 kilograms of CO2 equivalents. This is, of course, based on Brazilian data, but I can say from the report of Blonk Consultants that this is in line, more or less in line with what we see in the Netherlands, for example. And then when we energy reduce the feeds and we put in Excential Energy Plus, the nutritional emulsifier with its matrix value, we see a very high reduction in the carbon footprint, 3% reduction, which comes on top of the cheaper feed, of course. To put these figures in perspective, I took the liberty to look at the Dutch poultry sector. In the Netherlands, we see that around 1 million tons of poultry meat per year is being produced. And if we would add the nutritional emulsifier in all these feeds, we could save 0.12 million tons of CO2 equivalent each year. And if we calculate this in terms of the Dutch climate agreement, we can see that this amount of CO2 equivalent saved equates to 10% 10% of the national target for agriculture based on this climate agreement. So the impact of this kind of feed additive, a nutritional emulsifier, is very, very big if we use it in reformulated diets. Of course, in this big progress webinar, we want to also focus on swine data. So after we received the data from Blom Consultants, we also contacted the Wageningen University, and they appointed a thesis student who actually looked at our swine data. First of all, we have 3 trials. We have in Peruvian data, we have Philippine data, and also Belgian data. And based on this data, he performed a similar life cycle assessment as was performed by Blom Consultants. We have 2 types of trials within this life cycle assessment. First of all, we have the Peruvian trial, where we energy reduced the feeds. We reduced 50 kilocalories per kilogram of feed. We fed the pigs for 1 month, and we see after 1 month that the nutritional emulsifier is indeed able to compensate for the energy reduction. Even better, he will improve the product will improve the performance of the animals. We see a higher body weight gain, we see a reduction in feed conversion ratio, and this comes on top of course, the cost-saving aspect and the improved income per pig. A second type of trials is then the on-top application of the nutritional emulsifier. Here we see in the Philippines and also in Belgium that indeed the on-top application of the emulsifier is also very interesting because we are able to improve the performance of the animals. Of course, the general digestibility of the ingredients is improved. So we see an effect on body weight, on feed conversion ratio, and of course the economical aspect is also very important, and that is why we calculated the return on investment here. We see 19:1 for the Philippine data and 5:1 for the Belgian data. So from an economical standpoint, it's also very interesting to use it on top. So in the end, the thesis student from Wageningen University performed this life cycle assessment. I already explained the method, which is based on the methods used by the European Commission or put forward by the European Commission. We have the 3 steps within the life cycle assessment, and then I also mentioned that specific software, CIMA Pro 9, was used, and also databases for background information such as EcoInvent and AgriBase was also used. If we look to the results, this is focused on carbon footprint, of course. We can see that both the energy reduced application of the nutritional emulsifier and on the other side, the on-top application, both bring a reduction, significant reduction in the carbon footprint. So this is a very interesting effect. And in the next slide, I make an average of this carbon footprint. So the reduction actually is similar as what we saw in the broilers, 3%. And if we calculate it to CO2 equivalents per kilogram of live weight, we see 0.14 CO2 equivalents. And this is only focusing on the carbon footprint, but within this life cycle assessment, also other environmental parameters are also included. So here I mentioned them as well. So we see also improvements in acidification, eutrophication, and land use. So in the end, we can actually, instead of talking about a nutritional emulsifier, we can also call it a sustainable emulsifier. In the end, I also calculated some return on sustainable investments. So here we are not looking at the economical return on investment, but we are looking at the sustainable return on investment, which is called return on sustainable investment, or RSI. We calculate this based on the carbon footprint that is needed to produce the nutritional emulsifier. Of course, inputs and carbon footprint is used for the production of the feed additive. But if we use the feed additive in a very optimal way in energy-reduced diets or even on top, we can save a huge amount of CO2 equivalents because we are increasing, at the one hand, the performance of the animals, and on the other hand, we can reduce the amount of oils that are in the diet. And if these oils come from plants that are grown in, for example, tropical regions where we have a lot of deforestation, then of course the sustainability impact of this kind of feed additive becomes even bigger. To finalize, to conclude, I have put up some 3 points that I find very important myself. So first of all, the life cycle assessment, as we saw, is in my opinion a very good method to map the environmental impact of additives. A second point is maybe some advice for the industry itself. Perhaps it is time to actually include life cycle assessments as part of least cost formulation. In this way, feed formulators would not only be able to calculate or formulate their diets based on the economical impact or the nutritional impact, but also the environmental impact. So I hope that this in the future will become the norm. And then as a third point, we cannot forget the nutritional emulsifier, of course, as we saw in the results that indeed it is very effective in improving the sustainability of broiler and swine feed. So this was my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you have some nice questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brecht. Excellent presentation. To start with you, because we'll open the floor for questions. So if you have any questions back home, please continue to send them. Your question revolves around the life cycle assessment approach. I was wondering, what is the reaction of your customers all around the globe about including a life cycle assessment analysis? Well, how do they respond to that?
Yes, so that's a very good question. In the end, I can talk from my experience because I promoted this kind of life cycle assessment data the past year. So I talked to clients in several regions in the world. And I can see that clients are very much interested, not only in Europe, but also in Southeast Asia. And I think if we look to the company structure, that more and more companies, big companies, are including sustainability managers. So there is for sure much interest from the industry. But I also have the feeling that this kind of data is very interesting, but that implementation in making feeds more sustainable, that this is something that companies focus on in the next couple of years. So it's not at the moment, but it will be in the next couple of years. And I'm very happy that we could talk about our life cycle assessments, because this also promotes the usage of this kind of tool in the industry.
Obviously, and with big progress, we like to focus on whatever is going to happen in the future as well, so that fits in well. Dr. Amir, I have a question for you as well.
Sure.
As you are based in Asia, could you shed a light on how important the theme of sustainability in feed production is in Asia in general?
So in general, it's getting some attraction. Obviously, it's not, we can say like, the whole region is going at the same rate, but we hear it now. Customers are interested, and I'm sure that the industry is going to take a step and go down that road. So,
is there any country in particular that jumps to mind that you think, oh, that country takes a leading role in this respect?
That's a really interesting question. So when we talk about country, I think it's more about policies, right? Like, about what comes down from institutions or government. But what we hear more is actually companies, the management. And I believe a part of that is what happened over the last few months with the prices, with the soybean issue, with corn, alternative ingredients. But looking at the countries, I don't want to name one because it can kind of maybe a sensitive issue. But it's more what I see is more companies that they are interested, and actually we are dealing with a few accounts right now on that subject.
I understand. So the drive is mainly at companies there. I'm just turning to your to your presenter here in the studio. Same question for you. As you are based in Europe, do you feel that there is a lot of attention for the theme of sustainability in feed production?
Yes, for sure. So in Europe there is a lot of attention, specifically because it is being driven by, of course, the European Commission and Europe as a whole. And I can say from experience that indeed some companies are already very much busy with this topic of sustainability, not only looking at feed production, but also looking at their whole operation. But I still believe that in general, as I already mentioned it before, there is interest, but it still has to be implemented. That is the point.
I see. And is there any country or company perhaps that kind of jumps to mind that you think, okay, that is a very good example to look at?
Well, not specifically, not a company jumps to mind. No.
Orffa, obviously, but
yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. I have a question here for you. Will you determine the life cycle assessment for all of your feed additives, or which ones are the next in line, perhaps?
Well, I can say that we focused at this nutritional emulsifier because it is very much used in the market to reformulate diets for broilers and swine. We see also some applications in aquaculture, for example. So we are at the moment focused on this feed additive specifically. But I can see that in the next couple of years we will also focus on other feed additives such as enzymes, as mentioned by the doctor. So there are much more other feed additives which have potential to improve the sustainability of feeds. And I also saw that, thinking about the international level, so the initiative that I mentioned, from IFIF and FIFANA and also other feed associations. They have been looking into, next to these low protein diets with amino acids, they also are now at the moment looking at other feed additives, probiotics, enzymes, phytobiotics. So we will have to follow that line and generate more data for the majority of our feed additives.
Definitely more work to do in the future.
Yes.
Then. Yeah. Okay, I got another question for you. How do you explain an increase in protein digestibility while the emulsifier acts on fats and not on proteins?
Yes, that's a very good question. We often get that question because in the end, as the viewer correctly assessed, the nutritional emulsifier is specifically designed to emulsify fats in the gastrointestinal tract. That's why we call it a nutritional emulsifier. But indeed, what we see in these metabolic studies is that the crude protein level is also increased, and this is what we see in all our metabolic studies. And a clear scientific evidence I do not have, but I believe it has something to do with the fact that if we can increase the digestibility of fat, and the fat is taken up through the epithelial cell wall, then we also do not block the digestibility of proteins that are also in the feed itself. So it's more about not blocking the digestion of the proteins within the feed, and that is my opinion. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Dr. Amir, I have a couple of questions for you as well.
Sure.
You were speaking about Synchros. Can it be used in an antibiotic-free or in an antibiotic reduction program?
Definitely, it could be a part. So obviously we need a little bit more for an antibiotic-free program, but it's definitely a positive product that can be matched with other parts for such programs. Definitely.
After all, environment is not the only thing we need to think about. Antibiotic reduction is another one. And can it also be used in combination with other feed additives or enzymes?
Well, enzymes definitely, because protease, in this case is more of a complementary NSP enzyme. So we need to include other enzymes to improve this digestibility. As I said, just very quickly on the upper GIT, because of the pH profile and what happens at the end with, for example, phytate levels. So we need enzymes such as phytase at the right dose, the right phytase enzyme. I believe is one of the primary enzymes that it needs to be included. There are other additions. So make the longest story short, enzymes definitely, and there are other additives that at the right let's say if it depending on the physiological state of the animal. There are definitely other additives that can be used and actually needed if you are going for an antibiotic-free program.
Thank you very much for that one. I would like to close off with a question for both of you. And I'm going to be a little bit of the devil's advocate here, because sometimes I hear that, when you talk about sustainability and feed production, you could interpret doing the same with less as an opportunity to do more with the same. And obviously that is not the intention, that's not the message you want to... What would you say to these kinds of voices? What would your answer be to that?
Okay, so I guess I'll go first, right? So it depends how you define it and how you put your, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, for example, feeding a strategy can be defined in 4 different ways. And how you define that, it kind of, comes up with, with that strategy. I think both of them, none of them wrong. Both of them may be right at, at a specific, situation. But I guess you end up in the same place. So whichever way you want to go, I think that the final step is going to be just a different path, right? So I hope I answered your question.
Yes, I definitely have. I'm curious to hear, Brecht, what would be your famous final words on that?
Yes, famous final words. Okay. Well, I would like to get back to what I showed with the nutritional emulsifier. So on the one hand, we have the application in energy-reduced diets, so achieving the same or more by using less. Or we have the on-top application of the nutritional emulsifier, which actually means we use the same amount of feed, but we achieve more output. Yeah. So I think it is based on both pathways, if I can call it like that, are very valid, and it depends on the kind of strategy that you want to follow as a company, of course.
I see. But bottom line is that you can do more with feed ingredients when thinking about a proper strategy, and then have a good sustainable approach. Gentlemen, I would like to draw this webinar to an end, and also saying to you, to the audience, but not before I have sent you away with a couple of last comments. First of all, just after this webinar, there will be a short survey. I would like to kindly ask you to fill that out, because it will help us to improve the quality of future webinars even further. Secondly, in case you would want to rewatch this webinar, or you would like to recommend it to somebody else, you can rewatch it at any time at www.pigprogress.net. And thirdly, we will have more webinars to come for you in the months and weeks to come. Next week, Thursday, I will be back in the studio with a webinar from our sister title, All About Feed, dedicated to antibiotic reduction. And I can reveal that we'll spend a lot of attention to both swine and dairy cows in that one. That will start at 3 p.m. CET. In addition, on the 28th of October, we'll have another webinar, and that is a Pig Progress webinar dedicated to piglets, and that will also start at 3 p.m. For now, that's all we had to share to you. I would like to thank Dr. Amir from Singapore. Thank you for being with us. I'd like to thank Brecht for their both their interesting presentations. I'd like to thank you, audience, for staying with us, and hope to see you soon at the next webinar. Goodbye.